Welcome back to the deep dive. If you were to name the single most foundational document for, well, all of Western thought and spirituality, you'd almost have to say the Bible.
Almost certainly, yeah.
But inside this ancient sacred text, there are these profound riddles, these high-energy mysteries that feel almost intentional, like blank spaces left for us to debate.
That's exactly right. And we're not here to, give a sermon. We're exploring the edges of the story, the places where the writers left a kind of dramatic gap, forcing you, the reader, to really think critically about it.
Yeah.
These are the mysteries that challenge how we think about our origins, about cosmic conflict, even the nature of divine government itself.
And these aren't just like minor footnotes, are they? These are the big, complex questions that skeptics love to bring up and, frankly, that theologians have wrestled with for millennia. So our mission today is to really extract the four major interpretations, theological, textual, that surround these enduring riddles. We want to give you a really structured, detailed look at the history, the mythology, and the ethical questions baked right into these foundational texts.
And we've pulled together a whole stack of sources, everything from early rabbinic commentary all the way to 5th century Christian mysticism. And we're going to move chronologically from the dawn of man straight through to the end of time.
Okay, so let's lay out the map for this deep dive. We've structured it around four huge questions. First,
the riddle of origin.
The inescapable paradox. Who was Cain's wife?
Then, the riddle of the ancients. Who or what were the Nephilim, those mythical ancient giants before the flood?
After that, we're looking at the riddle of structure. We're going to map out the, frankly, terrifying but meticulously organized hierarchy of both heaven and hell, especially the 9 orders of angels.
And we'll finish with the ultimate riddle, decoding the meaning of 666 and that persistent spirit of the Antichrist.
This is where history, mythology, and prophecy all collide. So let's start with the first family.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're starting our dive right after the expulsion from Eden. The human story, it takes a dark turn immediately.
Instantly.
Adam and Eve have 2 sons, Cain and Abel, and Cain murders Abel in a field. The very first act of human-on-human murder.
And God judges him for it, curses him to be a restless wanderer. He's sent away from the presence of the Lord.
He travels east of Eden to a place called the land of Nod. This is all in Genesis chapter 4, and it's right here in verse 17 that the Bible introduces probably its most famous logical paradox, and it does it with this shocking casualness.
It really does. The text just states it as a fact.
Yeah.
It says, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch.
And hang on, full stop. Adam, Eve, Cain, and Seth, their other son, are the only named survivors of the immediate family at this point.
Right.
So if Adam and Eve are the ancestors of all humankind, where on earth did Cain find a wife? In the land of Nod, of all places.
It just drops her into the story. No explanation, no backstory. It's the single most critical narrative omission because it immediately makes you question the whole linear story of creation.
So for thousands of years, scholars, readers, everyone has had to figure this out. If everyone comes from Adam, then this woman...
She has to be related, right?
She has to be. But if she was related, why is he in this other land, this land of Nod, that seems to be populated enough for him to be afraid?
Okay, let's unpack the solutions. We should probably start with the most traditional, logical one. The one that tries to stay strictly within the lines of the biblical text.
That would be the traditional view, which most people call the unnamed sister theory.
Okay.
And the support for it comes just a chapter later, in Genesis 5. It outlines Adam's lifespan, and it says he lived 930 years. But crucially, it also says he begot sons and daughters.
Plural. Not just Cain, Abel, and Seth, but lots of children, over a lifespan that's almost 1,000 years long. Exactly. So the deduction is pretty straightforward. Cain married one of his many, many unnamed sisters. She wasn't important enough to the main narrative to get a name, but she was a necessary part of the plan to populate the earth.
And we have to sort of suspend our modern ideas about incest here, right?
You absolutely have to.
Yeah.
In that earliest phase of human history, it wasn't a moral issue. It was a biological necessity. God's command was, be fruitful and multiply. There was literally no other option for the human race to survive.
So those political laws against incest came much, much later.
Thousands of years later. And they were there for a reason. First, you have the problem of genetic load. As humanity gets further from that, genetic perfection of Eden, defects start to pile up. Close kin marriage becomes biologically risky.
And the second reason?
Moral corruption. As the population grows, society gets more complex, and you need rules to maintain social order and prevent breakdown. But right at the beginning, The genetic risk was basically zero, and the command to populate was everything. So the sister theory is the most canonical answer you can find.
But, not everyone finds that satisfying, especially when you think about Cain's fear. He tells God, whoever finds me will kill me.
Right.
Is whoever. If the only other people alive are his immediate family, who are probably grieving Abel, that statement just doesn't seem to make a lot of logical sense.
And that's what brings us to the more interpretive solutions. So let's look at the second one, the textual view, the narrative omission.
Okay, so this one isn't about biology, it's about literary purpose.
Exactly. You have to ask, what is the book of Genesis really about?
It's about sin, redemption, the covenant between God and humanity.
Precisely. So the textual argument says the author of Genesis deliberately leaves out details, like who this wife was, or the names of Adam's other kids, because they just aren't critical to that main theological story.
So, mentioning the wife only serves one purpose: to show that Cain's lineage continues. A lineage that, quickly leads to building the first city and the acceleration of human sin.
Her identity is completely secondary to the moral message.
That makes sense. I mean, ancient genealogies did that all the time, right? They were selective. They mostly just recorded the male descendants that mattered for the story.
Universally. They're almost always focused on the male line for political or religious reasons. Mm-hmm. So the wife being unnamed just confirms she's a narrative placeholder for procreation, not a central theological figure.
Okay, now let's get to the really contentious option. The one that challenges that strict Adam and Eve only timeline. The extra-biblical view. The other tribe theory.
Yes, this is where you get into the really fascinating folklore.
This is rooted in, Jewish Midrash?
Deeply rooted in Jewish Midrash and later Kabbalistic traditions. It suggests there was a whole narrative that existed alongside the formal canonical one. It speculates that maybe there were other non-Adamic beings or proto-human groups created before the Adam and Eve story we know. Or maybe they just existed outside the garden.
And this is where the legend of Lilith comes in, isn't it? Adam's supposed first wife, who refused to submit to him, fled Eden and started her own lineage.
That's the classic source for this idea. So when Cain is banished, he goes to the land of Nod, a word that literally means wandering. If Nod was already populated by a separate lineage descendants of Lilith or some other primordial creation, then Cain's fear of being killed suddenly makes perfect sense.
He's an outsider entering foreign territory.
Exactly. It's a very elegant explanation for his wife, for his fear. It ties it all up nicely.
But what's the theological problem with it?
The problem is canonical authority. It's a fascinating and popular idea in Jewish mysticism, but it has no direct, explicit support in the 39 books of the Old Testament. To accept it, you have to bring in material from outside the recognized sacred text. It shifts the conversation from scriptural analysis to folklore.
So we have the biological answer, the sister, the literary answer, the omission, the mythological one, the other tribe. What's the last one? The symbolist view.
The symbolist view argues that we're reading the word marriage too literally. Remember, Cain isn't just a murderer. He is humanity's first city builder. Genesis 4.17 says he founded a city and named it Enoch after his son.
Okay, let's connect those dots. He's banished from God, he's afraid of other people, and his first instinct is to build walls, to build civilization.
So in this view, the marriage symbolizes Cain's union with the secular man-made world. It represents human civilization built entirely apart from God's grace. The wife becomes a metaphor for the founding of his own self-sufficient kingdom.
That feels very consistent with how the Bible uses woman or wife later on. Israel as the wife of God, or Babylon as the great harlot in Revelation, symbolizing its unholy union with worldly power.
It's the same symbolic language. Cain's wife, in this light, is the manifestation of his ultimate choice. He abandoned faith in God's protection and embraced a world built on human industry, on violence, on separation. And that choice immediately makes the sin problem on earth so much worse.
It sets the stage for a level of contamination so profound that it requires a global judgment.
Which brings us directly to the Nephilim.
The stage is set. The seeds of sin are sown, and now we move from the riddle of propagation to the riddle of cosmic corruption.
The Nephilim mystery, which we find in Genesis chapter 6, it's arguably the most mythological and dramatic event before the flood.
And the text presents it as the direct cause, right? The reason the earth became so violent and corrupt that God just decided to wipe the slate clean.
It's the final straw.
Yeah.
Genesis 6, verses 2 and 4 just drops this bombshell. The sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward.
So let's start with the word itself, Nephilim. It gets translated as giants, but what does it actually mean?
The term is It's really loaded. It comes from the Hebrew root nephal, which means to fall.
So the fallen ones.
Literally the fallen ones. And the text describes them as more than just tall. They were mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. That suggests, yes, immense strength, but also huge notoriety, probably for violence, for cruelty, for political power.
The entire mystery, though, it all hangs on that one phrase, the sons of God uniting with the daughters of man. How you interpret those few words seems to define your entire view of the pre-flood world.
It absolutely does. So let's start with the most dramatic and oldest theory, the one that basically turns Genesis into an epic of cosmic rebellion. That's the fallen angels watchers theory.
The argument here is that the phrase sons of God, Bnei Ha-Elohim in Hebrew, has to mean celestial non-human beings, angels.
Right. We see that exact phrase used elsewhere in the Old Testament, like in the Book of Job, where the Bnei Ha-Elohim come to present themselves before God. It's a technical term for celestial beings.
So if they are angels, this theory says that a group of them descended to earth because they lusted after mortal women.
And this was an unholy, unnatural union, a profound violation of the cosmic order God had set up, mixing the spiritual realm with the material one in a way that was completely forbidden.
And their children, the Nephilim, are these monstrous hybrids, half angel, half human.
Yes. And this is where that extra biblical material becomes so important for understanding the traditional view. Texts like the Book of Enoch, which was widely read and very influential in early Jewish and Christian circles, they go into dramatic detail about these angels. They call them the Watchers.
And the Watchers didn't just reproduce, they actively corrupted society, didn't they?
They did. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers taught humanity all this forbidden knowledge that just accelerated their fall into sin. They taught them how to make weapons of war from metallurgy, the secrets of magic and sorcery, even things like cosmetics.
Wow. So it's an angelic intervention that basically speeds up human moral decay, filling the earth with violence.
Exactly. And that's what makes the flood necessary. It's not just a punishment. It's a divine surgical procedure to cleanse the world of this hybrid, polluted, and technologically advanced species.
That's an incredibly powerful story. It argues that evil, in this case, came from a spiritual trespass. But a lot of traditional scholars, especially those who want to stick only to the canonical text, they argue against this theory.
They do. They prefer to keep the focus on human moral corruption. Which brings us to the second major theory, the godly line of Seth theory.
This view argues that the sons of God are just human beings. How does that work?
Well, after Cain killed Abel, Adam and Eve had another son, Seth. And according to this interpretation, Seth's lineage became the righteous, pious line. They were the sons of God who honored the divine.
And the daughters of man, they were Cain's descendants.
Yes, the secular, violent, unrighteous civilization that Cain founded. So the sin here wasn't angelic lust, it was unauthorized intermarriage. The pious line of Seth abandoned their spiritual principles because they were attracted to the worldly women from Cain's line.
So the Nephilim, their children, weren't half angels, they were just the product of this spiritual compromise.
Exactly. They became intensely violent and proud, inheriting the worst traits from both sides. This interpretation keeps the whole conflict grounded in human moral failure, which aligns really well with the broader biblical narrative of God judging human sin.
But, okay, that leaves a pretty big logical gap, doesn't it? The angel theory explains the giants immediately. If this was just the intermarriage of two human lines, no matter how good or bad, why did it produce giants? Why did it produce mighty men who were so bad they required a global flood to wipe them out?
That's the essential challenge to this theory. The proponents have to redefine what mighty men and renown means. They'll argue that the Nephilim's might wasn't necessarily superhuman physical strength, but moral, political, and spiritual might. They were tyrants, powerful despots.
So not necessarily giants in stature, but giants in, oppression.
Or another argument is that given the huge lifespans of early humanity, Adam living 930 years, maybe the early human species was just biologically bigger and more robust than we are today. And the Nephilim were the peak of that physical power combined with total moral corruption.
It's a sophisticated argument. It definitely minimizes the mythological part and maximizes the ethical warning. What's the third interpretation? The tyrannical rulers theory.
This one roots the whole problem in the socio-political reality of the ancient Near East. It argues that the sons of God were powerful kings or rulers like pharaohs in Egypt or Mesopotamian monarchs who routinely claimed divine descent to legitimize their absolute power.
Kind of like the divine right of kings, but thousands of years earlier.
Precisely. And they would violently seize common women, the daughters of man, for their harems. The Nephilim were the children from these acts of state-sanctioned oppression. They were notorious for it. The men of renown whose fame was built on tyranny.
So in that case, the Nephilim are a symbol for the peak of human tyranny and injustice before the flood, a critique of empire.
And regardless of which theory you lean towards, half-angels, compromised Sethites, or tyrannical despots, the outcome is the same. The generation before the flood was a species that had fundamentally violated its boundaries, whether they were cosmic or moral. The flood was meant to cleanse the world of this corruption.
But, of course, the story doesn't end there. The text tells us the Nephilim either survived or they came back.
They absolutely did, and it's one of the most chilling details in the Exodus story. When Moses sends the 12 spies into the Promised Land, they come back terrified. They report seeing the Anakim, who were descendants of the giants.
And the language they use in Numbers 13 is just devastating.
It is. They say, "There we saw the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them."
That psychological impact, to feel so completely insignificant and powerless.
It was paralyzing.
Oh, yeah.
And it implies that either the flood wasn't completely total, or the same spiritual or genetic corruption reemerged somehow through Noah's family. And we see giants plaguing Israel for centuries after that.
Like Goliath, who David fought. He was over 9 feet tall.
King Og of Bashan. Deuteronomy describes his massive iron bed. It was, 9 cubits long? Clearly a man of enormous size.
So the persistence of the giants really changes the story. It's not a one-off mythological event. It's this ongoing, continuous conflict against these extraordinarily powerful forces.
A structured conflict, which compels us to look at the spiritual realm itself, which turns out to be way more organized than most of us probably imagine.
Right. We need to shift from the chaos of giants on Earth to the magnificent structured order of heaven and hell.
Exactly.
You know, when we talk about the spiritual realm, we often think of angels as just these benevolent messengers. But the Bible describes entities with, profound power, terrifying appearances, and a really clear chain of command.
It is definitely not a spontaneous collective. It's much more like a highly effective military and administrative state. And the most influential framework we have for understanding this order, the 9 choirs of angels, comes from a 5th century mystic theologian known as Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite.
So he took all these scattered, frankly mind-bending descriptions from prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel and from the Apostle Paul, and he organized them into a logical structure.
A logical hierarchy. 9 orders, split into 3 spheres, based on how close they are to God and what their job is in the cosmos.
Okay, let's start at the very top. The first sphere, the ones closest to the divine source.
This sphere is all about pure contemplation and worship. They just reflect the holiness of God.
And the highest order of all, the seraphim, the burning ones.
Their description comes mainly from Isaiah chapter 6, when the prophet has a vision of them in the temple. They are the absolute epitome of divine holiness. They symbolize burning zeal, purity, and their only job is eternal worship, constantly crying out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts."
And the physical description is what's so wild, and it's often lost in, pop culture.
It's magnificent. They have 6 wings. 2 to cover their faces, because they can't look directly at the fullness of God. 2 to cover their feet, as a sign of humility. And 2 to fly. And Isaiah says the sound of their voices literally shook the foundations of the temple.
They're the fire of God's love made manifest.
Exactly. And right beneath them are the cherubim.
Who are definitely not the cute chubby babies on greeting cards.
Not at all. In Scripture, they are fearsome guards. They are the fullness of knowledge. Their job is to protect the sacred. They guarded the path to the tree of life after Adam and Eve were kicked out of Eden.
And their description in Ezekiel is probably the strangest in the entire Bible.
It is truly bizarre. They have 4 wings and 4 faces. The face of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. It's meant to represent the fullness of all creation.
And the most unsettling part, they're covered in eyes.
Completely covered. It's a symbol of God's omniscience, his wisdom. They see everything, past, present, and future all at once. When they move, the sound of their wings is like the noise of great waters. They are the living embodiment of God's wisdom.
And the third order in this top sphere, the thrones.
They symbolize God's justice and unwavering authority. And they're often depicted less as winged beings and more as these giant spinning wheels of fire, the ophanim in Hebrew tradition, also covered in eyes, always in motion. They represent the steadfast foundation of divine rule.
Okay, moving down to the second sphere. These are the heavenly governors. They're the operational commanders, the ones who execute God's will on a massive scale.
The dominions are at the top of this sphere. Think of them as administrators. They govern and coordinate the duties of all the lower angels, making sure the divine plan gets transmitted down the chain of command.
And the virtues.
They are the conduits of divine power. The virtues are responsible for executing miracles and signs for the large-scale workings of God's power in the physical universe. They're often associated with controlling the movement of the stars, the forces of nature.
And we have the powers, the warriors.
And this is so crucial for understanding that Nephilim problem we talked about. The powers are tasked with guarding the celestial borders, maintaining cosmic order, and engaging in intense spiritual warfare. Their mission is to fight against the forces of darkness and make sure evil doesn't destabilize creation.
And finally, the third sphere, the heavenly messengers, the ones closest to us.
The principalities are focused on earthly governments. They guard nations and cities, they influence political rulers, and they work to shape human societies according to the divine will. They're the unseen hands in global affairs.
Then the archangels, like Michael and Gabriel, chief messengers, military commanders, delivering the most critical announcements.
And at the bottom, you have the angels, the most numerous order. The common messengers who interact directly with us, guardian angels, delivering simple messages, intervening in daily life. This whole ninefold structure, it shows this sublime intentional order. It's breathtaking.
But that order exists in stark contrast to the structure of eternal judgment, which suggests the punishment for sin is just as meticulously structured as the command of holiness.
It is. When the Bible talks about the final judgment, the single English word hell is actually translating three distinct Hebrew and Greek concepts. It shows a kind of tiered structure for the afterlife.
Let's start with the first one, the temporary place. Sheol, Hades.
Right. Sheol in Hebrew and Hades in Greek refer to the temporary place where all deceased souls went before the final judgment. In the Old Testament, both the righteous and the wicked went there. The traditional understanding was that it was divided by a great gulf. On one side was a place of comfort for the righteous, sometimes called Abraham's bosom, and on the other, a place of torment for the wicked.
But the whole structure of the afterlife changed profoundly after Christ. You mentioned the righteous were released. This points to a really crucial theological event.
It does. It's the doctrine of the harrowing of hell. After his crucifixion, but before his resurrection, Christ descended to Sheol, Hades. The purpose was twofold. First, to proclaim his victory over death, and second, to lead the souls of the righteous, everyone who is in Abraham's bosom, out of Sheol and into heaven.
So Christ literally changed the geography of the afterlife.
He did. After the harrowing, the righteous no longer went to Sheol. So today, Sheol, or Hades, primarily functions as the temporary holding place for the unrighteous dead while they await their final judgment.
Okay, so the second concept, Gehenna. This is the one Jesus himself used most often to talk about eternal punishment.
And its origin is viscerally real. Gehenna is named after the Valley of Hinnom, which was a real ravine just outside Jerusalem that served as the city's burning trash dump. The fires there burned perpetually, consuming garbage in the bodies of executed criminals.
That real-world place gives him the perfect sensory metaphor for the ultimate place of torment.
It's a terrifyingly perfect metaphor. Jesus used Gehenna to describe the true final punishment, and he emphasized it with sensory details. Unquenchable fire and the worm that does not die. It depicts this consuming pain, perpetual filth, and eternal separation. The ultimate contrast to the burning holiness of the seraphim.
And finally, the lake of fire, the absolute eternal state of finality, which we find mostly in the Book of Revelation.
This is the final destination, after the final judgment. It's where death and Hades themselves are thrown, along with Satan, the fallen angels, and all the unrepentant and wicked. It's called the lake of fire and sulfur, and it symbolizes the second death, an absolute eternal separation from God's life, from his grace, from his presence. It's the final permanent undoing.
The majesty of the cherubim and seraphim, terrifying description of Gehenna. This entire structured system reveals that the choices we make here on Earth have these absolutely cosmic structured consequences.
Which leads us perfectly into the most charged prophecy of all time, the ultimate expression of rebellion against this divine structure.
We have to decode the number of the beast.
Yes, we do.
This is the prophecy that has launched, millions of books, documentaries, conspiracy theories. Revelation chapter 13, verse 18. Calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
And the key word there is calculate. This is not a random number. It's not just an abstract symbol. The text tells us explicitly that it represents a man. So to solve it, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of a first-century Jew or Christian living under Roman oppression.
And the tool they would have used for that calculation is gematria. Can you explain exactly how that works? Because this is the key piece of technical knowledge we need to unlock this whole riddle.
Gematria was an ancient practice, very common in both Hebrew and Greek, where every letter of the alphabet also corresponded to a specific numerical value. So to calculate the value of a name or a title, you would just add up the numerical values of each letter. It's basically an alphanumeric code.
So John, the author of Revelation, needed to criticize the supreme tyrannical figure of his day, but he couldn't do it openly without getting himself and his readers executed by the Romans, so he created a cipher.
A brilliant cipher. He had to communicate a highly treasonous message safely. And the overwhelming scholarly consensus is that 666 points directly and specifically to the Roman Emperor Nero Caesar.
This is where we need the proof. Can you walk us through the actual calculation that shows Nero Caesar equals 666?
Of course. You use the Hebrew transliteration of the Greek name Neron Caesar. The Hebrew consonants for that name are Nun, Resh, Vav, Nun, Kof, Samek, and Resh.
And each of those has a number.
Right. N, Nun, is 50. R, Resh, is 200. O, Vav, is 6. The second N, Nun, is 50. Q, Kof, is 100. S, Samek, is 60. And the final R, Resh, is 200.
Okay, let me add that up. 50 plus 200 plus 6 plus 50 plus 100 plus 60 plus 200, that comes out to exactly 666.
That precise calculation, using the standard gematria system of the time, is 666. It's an incredibly specific and frankly elegant solution. It ties this mysterious prophecy directly to a known historical tyrant. Nero was the embodiment of the beast. He was the first emperor to systematically and brutally persecute Christians. He famously lit his gardens with burning believers.
But I have to challenge this a little because this is a deep dive. I know there's a competing reading in some of the oldest manuscripts of Revelation, the number 616.
That's a crucial point. Some early texts do read 616 instead of 1666. And the reason for that variation actually strengthens the Nero theory is because the number changes depending on whether you're using the Latin spelling of Nero's name or the Greek spelling.
So 616 is just the variant that omits the final N, the Nun, in the Hebrew transliteration, which would cause a 50-point drop in the total.
Precisely. The fact that the number shifts so predictably based on regional language variations basically confirms that 6666 and 616 were both ciphers for the title Caesar Nero. This isn't about some future computer chip. It was a political warning against a contemporary tyrant.
So historically, 666 is best understood as a political cipher symbolizing the ultimate human depravity that happens when absolute power is exercised completely apart from divine rule.
It connects the prophecy to the practical survival of the people reading it.
Yep.
And it also leads us to a really critical distinction when we define the Antichrist itself. Is it a person or is it something bigger?
Right. If you look at the source, the Apostle John, who wrote Revelation, he didn't save the term just for one single villain in the distant future. In his first letter, he says, even now many antichrists have appeared.
That is the pivotal distinction. It reveals that the Antichrist is not exclusively a single future political leader. It is, more fundamentally, an anti-Christian spirit or ideology that is always in opposition to the truth and authority of Christ. It's a recurring phenomenon all through history.
So we should be just as worried about the spirit of the Antichrist as we are about any single individual who might embody it.
Absolutely. The deeper interpretation warns us about what you could call the systemic Antichrist. This is the completely secularized, self-worshipping system that tries to replace Christ's authority and demands absolute loyalty from people.
And how would a system like that manifest today?
It shows up whenever humanity tries to build a kingdom of heaven on earth without God. Think of a modern, absolute humanist ideology that says man is the measure of all things and dismisses any divine authority, or a global governance that places economics, political power, and centralized self-will above any spiritual law.
Or even elevating technology as the only savior for all our problems.
Yes, that's a huge one. When society elevates technology as its sole savior, it displaces any need for spiritual redemption or divine help.
It connects perfectly back to Cain's wife, who, in that symbolic view, represented secular civilization built apart from God. The systemic Antichrist is just that same rebellion that scaled up to a global empire.
The Antichrist spirit, whether it's in a tyrant like Nero or in a modern ideology, is any power structure or philosophy that tries to enforce a system that denies the freedom to worship the divine and instead demands the absolute worship of human sovereignty. The conflict never ends. The players just change their clothes.
It takes the warning about Nero, that politically powerful, depraved man, and it scales it up to warn us about the systems of depravity that can swallow whole societies. It's the ultimate call for spiritual vigilance.
It is.
So we have journeyed through these intentional blanks, these profound riddles woven into the very fabric of Scripture. We started with the paradox of Cain's wife, and we looked at the problem of sin and human propagation right at the dawn of everything, and we concluded that Genesis really cares more about the theological story of sin than a perfect genealogical record.
Then we moved into the epic chaos of the Nephilim, and we explored those three main theories: the fallen angels, Seth's line intermarrying, and the tyrannical rulers. And we realized the core riddle is whether human history was messed with by the spiritual realm, or if it just succumbed to this extraordinary moral and political failure on its own.
Then we ascended to the sublime structure of the 9 choirs of angels. We contrasted the terrifying, ordered reality of the cherubim and seraphim with the tiered structure of judgment, Sheol, Gehenna, and the lake of fire, and we noted that crucial event, the harrowing of hell, that reshaped the entire afterlife.
And finally, we decoded the ultimate riddle of 666. We recognized it as a specific, verifiable historical cipher aimed at the tyranny of Nero Caesar, which led us to understand the Antichrist not just as one person, but as that eternal tension of the anti-Christian spirit, the system of self-worship that always seeks to replace the divine.
So the fundamental takeaway here for you, the learner, is that these unsolved mysteries, they aren't meant to frighten you or to be sensationalized. They aren't just historical problems to be solved and then filed away. Their ultimate purpose, woven right into the text, is to invite profound contemplation.
The gaps in the text, the conflicting ideas, the challenging codes, those are the spaces that are reserved for your own individual devotion and critical reflection. They demand a deep examination of our own faith and, which sovereignty we choose to serve.
So, building on that idea of the systemic Antichrist, that ideology of self-worship and autonomous human power, here is the provocative thought for you to carry forward. If the most dangerous threat is the system of elevated human will, what subtle ideology in your own culture, in your professional life, or even in your personal life, is demanding your absolute sovereignty and trying to replace the divine with human invention or power?
Contemplate the boundaries you are called to maintain. That is the real deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Bible's enduring riddles. We'll see you next time.